Hey everyone, I'm Chris Brown. I hope you'll join Jennifer Kite-Powell and myself for a great conversation on her podcast. I've been lucky enough to spend my career helping startups and founders build and grow, from Startup Wise Guys to 500 Startups to NVIDIA. I met Jennifer a few years ago through my European startup life, and this episode we discuss a little bit of politics and culture, the current state of AI and its crazy growth in the past few years, and my journey from the Pacific Northwest all the way to Estonia and a bunch of places in between.
You are listening to Tiny Little Victories, and I'm your host, Jennifer Kite-Powell. I'm so glad you're back with us today. We are going to be talking to Chris Brown, who is at NVIDIA in New York City. But I knew Chris from many years ago when he was in Tallinn, Estonia, and he worked for Startup Wise Guys. He was actually the consigliere. Yes, the whole branding is around Wise Guys. Really brilliant. But Chris has a very long and tenured experience in the innovation and startup world. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to talk about AI, where that's going. We seem to talk about that a lot. We're also going to talk about foundational technology, which I think is really important. We tend to get sort of tripped up and hooked on these very sexy pieces of technology that everybody sort of runs around and makes all these little hype bubbles. But Chris is really talking about foundational pieces of technology that drive us forward in terms of how we live, how we work, how we drive our cars. And he's also going to talk about crypto and why he thinks it's the biggest grift ever. So he's got a very wonderful voice. So you're going to stay connected that way. But he's just a delightful person who has a lot to share about his experiences. He even lived in the Ukraine during COVID-19. So stick with us and listen to this next podcast with Chris Brown. So one, entertaining, and two, you have such interesting stories. So we're going to pull those out of you in this casual catch up. I don't even have a drink. It's Friday afternoon, but I just want to ask the listeners, I mean, my God, does this man have a voice or what? Like, have you done voiceover before or like commercials? Because, oh my God.
No, although the closest I ever got to that was a startup that I was working with years ago who they needed a voice, somebody to read lines for like some of their like
Oh,
marketing stuff, and
yeah,
they looped me in.
they did. Because
Yes.
this would be like, what was it? Was it like selling, I don't know, like sex toys or something? Like, what was it?
I think that they were gosh, barely remember. There was like weird Hungarian company. They were they were doing like a platform for salons and things like that. Like
Oh,
the
okay.
many platforms of like, oh, you're a salon and a small
Yeah. Oh,
business,
it's a
and you should have,
platform. It's the platform era.
you should have a tool to manage
Yeah.
all of your bookings and things
Yeah.
like that. So
Well,
they used my
I
voice for that.
I think you might want to like capture all those and put them in like a show reel or something because I think you could really, make a side gig, a hustle
Uh,
on this one.
as a side note, my very first job, back when I was, gosh, 19, I want to say 18, 19, something like that.
Yeah.
I was working in it was just a call center, but it was a little more grandiose than that for like
Yeah.
this company that does like network control, but it was connected to banks and credit unions and things of that nature. And there was
Yeah.
this, you would start to build these sort of relationships with people because it was all over the phone, like working with like the telcos and things like that. Like, oh, the ATM
Oh,
is down,
yeah.
like, is the communications line bad?
Yeah.
And there was this woman, and I think that one of AT&T's big centers for this network control stuff was based out of St. Louis,
Oh, God.
and and I will never forget being an innocent
Yeah.
young kid
Oh, yeah.
and talking to her at one point, and then, like, it'd been however many months that I'd been on the job, and she just There was one time that I called, and she said in like it's a very specific tone, "Honey, has anyone ever told you you have the sexiest voice?" And I was terrified
Yeah, of
as
course. That's
a
like
young kid. I was like,
that.
"Oh my God, I don't
Yeah.
know what to say to a lady."
I too late because you're like a
Yeah,
19. Nobody's going. 19-year-olds or like girls are going. Oh man, you're so sexy. It's not even a word you use
yeah,
until you're
100%.
later in life, right?
Yeah, I think
That is
it,
so funny. But
it's
she
it
was
is
on to
hilarious.
something. This lady, like she was on to something. So you ignored it for many years, and now here we are again. This is your like your second reminder. Very sexy voice.
Thank
So
you.
you should
I
take it.
had
Put it.
zero control over it, but
I know,
yeah.
right? Zero control over it. It's great. Well, you have to anybody that's listening out here, and we do have, gosh, I just have to say thank you to all the listeners because we do have this really loyal base of listeners, and it's kind of fun to watch it grow. And we have listeners in Hungary,
Oh,
and
cool.
yeah, I know, and we have listeners in Czech Republic. I think I know who the people are in Hungary, but I'm really hoping now maybe we'll get some Estonian listeners since you guys, Chris
Absolutely.
has an amazing story. He spent a lot of time over there. But first, I'm going to set the stage for everybody. Correct me when I'm wrong, and then we're going to go through this journey. But your first job, one of your first jobs, in addition to this very sexy call center job you had, was you were a journalist. I saw that you were a
Oh
journalist.
God. Yeah, that
You
takes it a
it
long, long way back.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
let's go back because I love the fact you were a journalist for a newspaper or I can't remember what exactly, but in for Estonia, in Estonia, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I moved to Estonia when I was, gosh, 26,
Yeah, this
27,
is
somewhere
what I'm
around there.
trying to get my hands around because if you look at your life, Chris, it's like Portland, Oregon, Estonia. Like
Yeah.
those things are kind of don't go together.
Yeah, no, it's a well-trodden path that everybody knows,
Yeah.
the Portland to
Okay.
Estonia connection. No, I grew up all over the West Coast.
Okay.
Uh, I was, Bay Area is where my entire family is from, and I
Okay.
was the only one who was actually born in Oregon. But
Okay.
we moved up and down, and then we lived in like Spokane, up in
Yeah.
Washington
Oh
for
my.
for a year.
That's serious. That's serious like rainy West Coast.
Yeah, no, and that's why I think it works for me whenever
Yeah.
I go back and I'm like, oh, the rain, it feels right.
Yeah, your skin is all moist and dewy.
And so the I had started like a couple of businesses when I was a very young kid. I don't
Mm.
know, 19, 20, 21, something like that. One was in retail, which is a great way to definitely not make any money.
Yeah.
And the other was in like a sort of evolved out of that was like an events management and consulting business for
Hmm.
the super cool industry of trading card games.
Wow.
Yeah, so for everybody who has ever played like Magic or Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh or any of those,
Which is
we,
like everybody.
yeah, I mean, I guess at this point, a lot of those people are now adults.
Yeah, still playing it though. It's not like a massive business industry because only like 10 people are playing it.
Yeah, no, it's kind of bananas how I was just looking at some data the week before, that Magic has somehow had its largest year of sales in its history. And
Oh my
I
God.
remember back in the 90s and then early 2000s, I was sort of like, every single year, I'm assuming, okay, this is the peak, and
This
now
is
it's
it
all
for
going to go
them, right?
downhill because like there's no way that this product can continue to have the sort of longevity that it has.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we were doing was helping develop and drive their marketing systems and their organized play systems, and so that was
Yeah.
something that was something that basically um, we helped sort of develop with them, and help manage some of the data and things like that. And
Yeah.
I'd been doing that for about 4 years, and I got to this point where I realized that there was kind of an upper limit of what this could be. So I wanted to sort of change my life around
Yeah.
and see some
And
other stuff, and I had gone traveling as I'd done before, and wandered into Estonia, and I was like, this
oh, I
seems
love
like a
that.
really interesting place.
It is so interesting.
Yeah.
It's like a little, it's like before we jump to Estonia, I just want to say, like when you were working at this as events for this trading card game as this events manager, did you think they would be around, Magic would be around 30 plus years? Just
I did
question.
not.
Okay.
No way at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had a little wanderlust. You did that for about 4 years, and then you hit the road. And I take it you were just traveling around Europe, and then you stumbled into the magical country that is Estonia and Tallinn. Like it is kind of magical there. It's almost like a movie
Yeah.
set. Tallinn, I
Yeah.
think.
It's
Yeah.
a really unique place.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I was drawn to it was it operates at the convergence of a few different cultures.
Hmm.
You've got Scandinavian culture and Slavic culture and Germanic culture and its own sort of unique Baltic culture. And, it had always been dominated or under the control of some random great power over the years. And I think that sense of like having an identity, but also being
Part of something
part of
else.
something
Mm.
has been a valuable thing in the sense
I
that yeah, it forced Estonia to kind of always be focused on like, well, who are we?
yeah.
Not just as part of this
Yeah.
larger entity.
That's a really good point because you often hear and read and see obviously through history the acquisition of cultures or multicultures living together, especially during the Ottoman Empire or before the Ottoman Empire. And I didn't know that Estonia had a Scandi influence in it. That see what we learn on Tiny Little Victories. We learn something new. And I mean, I think it is magical. And I think if we want to flash forward to on some of the things that you talked about, this convergence word that you used, because they really probably did look in a mirror and say, "Hey, who are we?" Right?
Yeah.
Like, are we part of, Eastern Europe? Are we a Baltic country? Do we have these
Hmm.
ties to Scandinavia? Are we these, you know, part of this regime? And
Hmm.
do you feel like it really forced them to create what the identity that we sort of see today, which I think is more a nurturer, incubator type place for, technology and technology startups, which is really where you sort of migrated to. Is
Yeah,
that
I think.
because of Estonia?
Well, I think that was a really foundational piece
Mm-hmm.
for everything that I did afterwards. But I think culturally, you could look at it and say um, it drove a very self-sufficient culture, and that
Mm.
that requires people to be creative and requires people to build for themselves. If you think about this idea that all right, this faraway power is kind of in charge of things, and they're not going to look at this place as something that we're going to focus our development on, it
Mm-hmm.
means that you have to build it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for a very small place, I think that
Yeah.
that is can operate as a bit of a sort of catalyst
Yeah,
for
that's a
that
good
type of
point.
building.
I like the self-sufficient culture because I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what you feel when you're there. And it's so different than Malta, right? Because they sort of, not the same way, but to me, they're sort of, again, in that crossroads, that
Mm-hmm.
historical people passing through to fight,
Mm-hmm.
back and forth. But they really centered on e-gaming. They really got
Mm-hmm.
into a very different path for themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Estonia feels, I don't know, a little more mature to me and a little more aware of its journey. I don't know if I feeling very like
Yeah.
self-aware today. Maybe that's why. But you
Yeah.
were you were able to start some really interesting things there. You started startup. You were part of Startup Wise Guys. That was mind-boggling at the time. For me, I
Yeah.
think that was when you really started seeing people like, hey, what's this Startup Wise Guys stuff in Estonia?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that Startup Wise Guys was obviously super influential in the starting point of my career, at least
Hmm.
the tech starting point of my career.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So I'd been when I moved there, I actually finished my undergrad there.
Oh.
Like I said, I'd been wandering around and I got there and I honestly, I Googled English Language University Estonia and then walked down to the university
I
the next
love that.
day, picked up an application, and then 6 months later, I was living there.
But
Uh,
they make that easy though, don't they, there?
yeah, no, it was a very straightforward process. And I think that coming from outside made it even easier in some
Mm.
ways. But the what that led to is like just all the relationships and friendships that I developed just being in a society
Mm.
meant that I had met a friend of mine there, Mike, who he had moved there to be with his partner, and as part of that, one of the things he was thinking about was like, hey, he'd come from IBM originally, and had recognized back then this whole like accelerator idea. And I had started talking to him right as they were just like getting off the ground for their very first batch.
Oh.
And he knew that I was unhappy with the work that I was doing, and that I wanted to do something more impactful. And then right as the first batch ended, his program manager left and was hired away by Microsoft, if I remember right.
Mm.
And then he called me up and was like, "Hey, you know, I need somebody to help me run this thing. You've started businesses before. You
Wow.
have a reasonable like head on your shoulders and like a lot of lessons learned in building any type of business, whether it's a tech startup or a small business, are applicable here in
Yeah.
terms
Yeah.
of those starting points." And so I kind of jumped on that and was sort of head first, and it was phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, that was when I think we first met was like in 2012, 2013.
Believe so,
And
yeah.
yeah, and you were considered the consigliere for Startup Wise Guys, which I think is a great title if you're going to have
Yeah,
like a Wise Guys in your title. And I remember going there and meeting you and being so impressed by the structure and the clarity of basically the vision that this group had for turning ideas into like world-changing technology. Like I really often thought that I wanted to go back to London. I was obviously living in France then. I go back and go, hey, you guys need to pay attention. Like this is how it's done.
yeah.
And I think that was such a really beautiful program that you helped to nurture and bring into focus for the rest of Europe, really.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it's
but
really amazing to see how it's evolved and grown
yeah,
since the time that I was there, and I think
yeah,
it speaks volumes about the necessity of programs like that and
yeah.
ecosystems, communities like that. So yeah, it's a
And
nice to
I
have.
feel like it grew so well in Estonia. I mean, I think I'm no offense to Hungary or Czech Republic, but I mean a little because so many amazing people there, but I just a little struggling there in that tech world. Whereas I think Budapest really has a film industry, a growing film industry there with all the studios,
Mhm.
and I just really felt like Estonia really put their money where their mouth was when it
Yeah,
came to this tech. And this weren't they the country that did like the global citizen, like
yeah.
you could
No,
become
the e-resident program,
yes.
was really all about this idea that,
Yeah.
hey, you can be part of this ecosystem from a regulatory perspective, a taxation
Yeah.
perspective, and a registration perspective, without having to physically be there and get a foothold in a
Yeah.
key market, like all those things that
I
people are
love that.
looking for
I love
from
that because
communities.
that's really what we
Yeah,
want to do. And everything's just based around taxes, movement, you can't go here, you can't go there for taxes.
yeah.
Is there, I mean, that was like in 2012, but did you feel that when you were there and you'd come out of university and Mike came to you for Startup Wise Guys that you felt like there was a big, American like expat culture there? I mean, you said he was wandering around over there. I mean, why were people like tripping over themselves to get into Estonia in the
I
2010?
never, I never really like. I never felt like there was a huge community, but
Okay.
I was different in that I didn't hang out with the expat communities that were there. I knew some, it was like, for example, some professors who were there,
Yeah.
who were awesome, and like, but I only knew them through that process and experience. I know that there were places like a specific bar that I know a lot of like expats hung out at,
Mm.
but it wasn't something that I went out of my way to be engaged in, and so
Yeah.
yeah, I know that there were some, but it was more of a, at least in, if I think about university, right, it was very much all across Europe that people were coming there for. But with Erasmus, like that's always
Yeah.
going to be the
Oh yeah.
case.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think it was I don't think it was any uniquely high level of draw, but I would be interested to be back now and sort of see how, now that
Yeah.
it's recognized on a more global scale, what that has done to the sort of
Yeah.
makeup and demographics of the ecosystem when it comes to
It
expats
really
and things
would.
like
It
that.
really would be because you think of when they had that EU residential part of that, and then all the
Yeah.
things that have happened there. So I mean, like I said, I am obviously very fascinated by you and your background because you just seem to literally be that perfect global business citizen, right? Like all the other things you've done, where you were the manager at 500 startups. You actually did do work with IBM in New York, but
Mhm.
yet you were still working in Eastern Europe, and then you have to tell everybody this story because it's fascinating. But you were in Eastern Europe. You were in Kiev, I think, when COVID came. Is that
Yeah.
right? Yeah. You got
Yeah,
to
that
tell this
was,
story.
well, it was a weird sort of time. So I was in Moscow, helping build the accelerator there for them in
Oh,
Russia.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and that had been in partnership with a big bank there, and 500 wanted to build a presence, which obviously is no longer the case.
I was
Uh,
gonna put a pin in that and come back around, but you
Reasonably
did it
so.
already. Right, right, right.
Yeah, and then I had gone down to Ukraine because a friend of mine who helped drive a lot of stuff at 500, he was working with a VC there who was going to be focused on gaming and esports and things like that. And they wanted somebody who could help kickstart their US presence. They were going to be like
Hmm.
a hybrid VC and accelerator,
Mm.
and they made me the offer to join them back in November. Yeah, November of 20. What was that? Gosh, 2019, I believe.
Everybody's blurry
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
It's like, wait, when was that?
2019.
Yeah,
And then it kind of got delayed and
yeah.
delayed, and they were kind of dragging their feet. And they're like, yeah, we want to start around the first of the year. We just got to seal up some deals, and then it kept getting delayed. And finally, in February, I went in. We finalized the numbers, and it was all good to go. Uh, and then, and then COVID
You see
hit.
this coming, right?
Yeah, and then COVID hit, and they weren't like, "Hey, it's all like we're in crisis mode. We gotta figure out what's
Yeah.
going on here." I just literally never heard from them again.
So they just disappeared.
Yeah, no, and even after I reached out to them, and like there's
Yeah.
radio silence.
Oh my
So that
God.
yeah, it was a surreal experience. So
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 you're
then
stuck you're in Kiev.
yeah,
COVID's here. There's no job.
yeah. And so, but if you think about it, like, okay, four walls in a place like Kiev
Yeah.
is a lot cheaper than four walls in Manhattan. So,
Oh, heck
and if
yeah.
if we're all going to be locked down for God knows how long, might as well take advantage of it. So just sort
Yeah.
of hunkered down
I
and
love that.
just yeah. So it was a kind of surreal. No, not kind
Wow.
of. It was
Yeah.
an
What was
extremely
it
surreal
like? Like
experience.
you obviously stayed in your apartment, and then what was that like? I mean, I've been to Kiev, and
Yeah,
just so we say again, I can say this. I'm not going to speak for you, but my heart bleeds for Kiev right now. So
yeah.
I hate what's going on over there, and I always every day I wake up with like, please let's stop this war. And it's so interesting because I've been there. I went there with for work with God, what was that guy's name? Ciclum. It's when they were a startup
Mm-hmm.
over there and
Mm-hmm.
spent lots of time there. And so here you are, 2 years, and knowing like what did you do? Was it all closed? Was it just you had to stay in your
It was
apartment? What was that like?
surprisingly open, I think, for most of it. Like it was like, hey, like masks and things like that. But
Yeah.
the numbers in Kiev were really good for a long time. There was
Mm,
a surge a little bit later than we saw in other places. They closed down the airports for,
yeah.
gosh, I want to say like a month or two at least. So
Oh.
it was just kind of there. I did some work with a friend who was consulting with like the government over in Georgia, as well as
Hmm.
doing some work with Dogpatch Labs up in Dublin, helping them on their presentation for
Hmm.
the government of Ireland to help run like the National Irish Accelerator. So,
Oh,
I,
that's
I
cool.
yeah, it was
You
like
are
kind
the consigliere for accelerators. Like that should,
yeah, no, and I kept busy with that stuff,
yeah.
and it was really good. So that was, but the whole time it was very much like looking for a new role, and in the
Yeah.
middle of the pandemic, when you're overseas, that was a much harder
Oh,
proposition.
I can't even
Yeah,
imagine. Did you like talk to people like, well, it's a pandemic. You can come back. We'll look at it. I mean, was it feels like there would be not much happening.
yeah, it was. I mean, it's all a little bit blurry at this point because there's just so many like
Okay,
stop
we
and
don't have to go back
starts.
there. Yeah, we don't have
Yeah,
to go
no,
back
I
there.
mean
Yeah, let's not
it's
go
just
back there.
meh. It's
You
just
know,
bad.
it's very interesting because I interviewed a really amazing woman. I've known her for several years. She was a high tech PR person from Seoul, South Korea,
Mm, yep.
and yeah, she was so good at her job. And
Mm,
she worked for Fujitsu. She did a lot of work for them through the
yeah.
agency she was with. She just was pretty remarkable. And then one day she was like, "I'm quitting, and I am getting my PhD, and I'm going to be a business consultant, like psychology business consultant." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Whoa, that's crazy." But anyway, so she was on the show and we were talking very similar things like what was happening for you during COVID. She goes, it's so dramatic. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm like, we don't have to talk about it. But she actually got that PhD, she had a baby, and, it's interesting to see what people did with that time. But I think there's a lot of common denominators of, oh my goodness, is a long time ago. It's a little blurry. I'm gonna put it behind me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that whole time was surreal for everybody because
Yeah,
like it
yeah,
was not nothing about it was normal. And
yeah.
I
Nothing. Yeah,
think now, even when we talk about like, oh, how long ago was it, I sometimes will say like, oh yeah, it was a couple years ago, and then it's like, no, it was 6 years ago, because
yeah,
there was a period in there for everybody that was not correlated with
yeah,
normal reality.
yeah. That's so
So
true.
yeah.
That is so true. And it is, I hate to say, truth is stranger than fiction, but I don't know, in the Marvel movies, it's like, oh, this blip. I'm like, yeah, we're living the blip. Like we all
Yeah,
blipped.
yeah,
We blipped together.
100%,
And it
100%.
feels so weird, so weird. And so you've come back to New York. You're in New York. We're not going to talk about where you work now, but you've worked for a very cool company. I don't know if you can, we're not going to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
it
no, I
unless
mean,
you
I
say
can
it.
say I
Okay.
work for
Okay.
NVIDIA. Like that's,
Yeah. Woohoo.
yeah, yeah.
That's I'm so in love with this company. Like, I really love them. And you are basically taking all these years of all the things you've done. You've brought this to NVIDIA, right? We won't talk too long about it, but you're packaging up all this work with startups, your consigliere work, and you're bringing that to these people, which I think is great because I love this company.
Yeah, no, and I mean, obviously, I can't talk about like
Yeah, we won't talk
NVIDIA's
about it.
positions on things or anything like that, but my sort of thought process is that it's great to join and be a part of a company that is very foundational in a
Yeah.
lot of the
Yeah.
technology out there today. And it is a logical extension for me of, all right, I've always been in a position since I kind of got into the tech space of supporting startups and founders in whatever way that I can.
Hmm.
I think that there's something, and that's why the consigliere, right,
Yeah. I
is
love this.
is
Yeah.
that role of like, okay, if you think about the pyramid of the mob, kind
Yeah.
of startup wise guys, and we leaned into that whole messaging.
Yeah.
If you think about that pyramid, like the consigliere is a part of the organization, but more like
Mm,
a an advisor
yes.
to leadership, as opposed to like within the pyramid of power itself.
Yes. I love that.
Um,
Yes. I wish I had a sound effect for that, but I don't.
yeah, and like that's I think one of the things that's great about NVIDIA is it's all about, hey, you're building this cool technology around language models. Like we have a
Hmm.
tool for you that you can use and it's free. We have a tool for you if you're like, oh, I'm building something around computer vision, or I'm building something around data
Yeah.
science, or crazy sort of out there stuff around physics simulation, or
Ooh.
weird, very specific use cases like, oh, you're building something that needs to do route optimization in
Yeah.
logistics. We have a tool for that.
Yeah.
And it's funny how so many people don't realize all the things NVIDIA does.
I think that is so true.
Yeah.
I mean, you said a very beautiful word here that I love. The reason why I gravitate towards this is that you talked about foundational technology, and that's what you're talking about, like this route option that you don't even think about route optimization in a fleet of trucks or any other thing, right? Like, and I love foundational technology, and I don't think people understand. Sort of like 3M, right?
Mhm.
Okay, you kind of know they're what, a chemical company. They are engineers, and you tell people like, oh yeah, they invented that adhesive on the piece of
Yeah.
paper that makes it
Yeah.
stick. That's foundational. I mean, I'm making air quotes
Yeah.
here.
No,
Technology, right?
100%.
Like the
Yeah.
scrubby scrub brush, the sponges with the stuff on the other side. Like somebody
Mhm.
invented that at 3M. It's all
Yeah.
science.
Yeah,
It's
and it's a
fascinating.
kind of cool position to be in.
Completely.
It
I think it's great. It's
yeah.
real. It's tangible.
Yeah, it's an amazing it's an amazing like role where we're not telling anybody how to build technology. We're just being like, we know there's amazing builders out there. Let's help you get that done. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think that's one of those things where I every time I
Yeah.
get to work with all of these incredibly smart people inside of NVIDIA, all I think about is like, wow, we're really like at the forefront of all of these things, not just one element or another.
Yeah.
And it's awesome to be a part of.
But I
Yeah,
think that's, you've seen a lot. Like I did make a joke in the beginning about, yo, no, not another platform. And I get it, right? People, I get a lot of pitches for Forbes for this. It's like, oh, look, it's a platform. Okay, sorry, no thanks, because I don't feel for me that I'm just too interested about platforms, but I'm really looking at like things that can change the world, pieces of
Hmm.
foundational tech that can change the world.
Yeah.
And I love that. So speaking of foundational technology, and I have a pop quiz for you. So I know you're very close to technology, and I know that obviously you know what's happening out there in the world on social media. What technology is bugging the crap out of you right now? Like, is there any topic around technology that you're just like, no more?
Bugging the crap out of me. Well, that's
Okay,
kind of
I thought of this. I take it back. It could
oh.
really be something that you're musing over, maybe, or you would like to rant over.
Well, okay. So something that I think I can rant over reasonably is
Oh,
like,
good, a rant. I love it.
yeah. I mean, so I still see things these days under the that fall under the category of Web3 or crypto or literally anything in that space.
Yep.
I am really hoping that we will get to a point where people acknowledge, like, oh, this was all a grift from day one.
I love it.
Literally every element
Yeah.
of this was just people looking at systems of power and saying, "Hey, how can I build something that I can really take advantage of and convince people that there's some sort of like grand positive idea behind this?" I think that's a the the problem with crypto goes so deep that it's difficult to capture
Hmm.
in like the span of a podcast. But I think that this foundational idea stems from this libertarian techno utopian ideal that
Hmm.
so many in Silicon Valley have glommed onto over the years that is focused on, hey, I don't believe that I should be beholden to any system, to any government, to any regulation, to any financial system. I believe that we're too smart for that. We're too good for that. We're above that.
Mm,
And so we're going to invent a system that lives outside of the institutions of society.
yeah.
We don't believe that we should be bound by governments. And there is a extraordinary darkness that lives at the heart of that belief set. That
I totally agree with you, and I
yeah,
do have a sound for that, and that's going to be this.
yeah.
So well said. I'm just going to sit back now and put my feet up and let you keep going.
No, I mean, it's there's not honestly a whole lot more to say. You know, you had a bunch of people who saw this tool, who that was obviously created by somebody out there,
Yeah.
who comes from this belief that like, oh, like what if I could just not be a part of any of this?
Yeah, it's so
Um,
well said. It's
eh,
so well said.
yeah, and the um, this idea that it has taken us millennia to develop, for example, financial institutions that people all across a society and spanning multiple societies and civilizations look at and have the capacity to deposit in trust
Mm,
into
mm-hmm. Yeah,
is maybe the entire reason that our civilization exists in the way that it does today. And
completely
the
agree.
people who want to live outside of that are the people who look at these existing systems of power and say, oh, these are unjust, these are unfair, they're inequitable, all of which are true, right? And it's not
Yeah.
that we should look
Yeah.
at the global financial system, global
It's
capitalism, and be like, oh, this is all reasonable. It's
yeah.
not, obviously, but this
Yeah.
is a iterative process that
Yeah.
evolves over centuries. This is not like I'm unsavvy. It just all has to change
Yeah.
now because it makes me feel bad,
Yeah, exactly. And
which is
also
psychotic.
those it is completely psychotic. It's every time I see a news item about it, I get a little upset because I see, very, like you said, these liberated techno ideal, like Silicon Valley people have glommed, by the way, use the word glommed, so check mark, that's awesome. Onto that. And then I read, the more deeper I read, I see, for instance, like Sam Bankman-Fried was bailed
Yeah,
out by Stanford professors.
of
Like
course.
the fact that this is happening in this very tiny subset of extraordinarily wealthy, extraordinarily entitled people that don't want to be a part of that system. And you what you said is great. It's taken a long time to develop a banking system that people can have trust in, and
Yeah,
that's often been, hard won at times, all the way through decades. So I agree with you on this, and I struggle because I'm gonna keep an open mind, but no, it just feels completely wrong. I'm two rants in your corner on that part right there.
yeah. And
And yeah,
the sad part is, it's not that these people are like, oh, we like this is really about democratization of these things, because
it's not.
at the core, it's not. What it's about is these people or these organizations operate in this position of power, and I would much prefer to be the king, right? I want to
Yeah,
be, I'm Tim Draper. I want to be the king of California,
yeah.
and so what we'll do is we'll just carve off the rich parts, and we can declare ourselves sort of mini lords and ladies of Silicon Valley, and without
Yeah.
having to respond to Sacramento or DC or any other power that we don't want to.
I think
And
that's a slippery slope, though. I
yeah,
think that you can look at the world's problems, or even like just not bother and look at what's happening in the U.S. with
yeah,
guns and politics and women's rights, and people like having these fringe
yep,
beliefs and saying, well, we'll just like chip ourselves off and do what we want anyway.
yep,
So there's a huge fragmentation taking place that I
yes.
do feel like you, like it's gonna be a lot of trouble down the road.
I have always thought about technology. I like to step back and think about sort of why do I believe in technology as a
Hmm.
tool of sort of freedom for humanity broadly. And ChatGPT is just another tool that potentially has, not potentially, that absolutely has the ability to drive ever greater efficiency in society in
Mm.
ways that ideally, and this is not always going to turn out this way, it's going to be used in insane ways as well. There'll be some really big like existential questions
Yeah.
around how we understand our relationship to a thing that, for all people's protestations, it's not alive in any way that, like, this is not a thing that where like it has feelings regardless of the output that it's giving. That's just a
Yeah.
series of billions of different parameters that end up at
Yeah.
the point of, well, this is how people talk.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even say that to itself. It is just
Yeah.
like the percentage of confidence that this is the next word is X.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yes.
we want to anthropomorphize kind of everything,
We
and
do. We'd love to do that
and
with bears. Yes.
yeah, but bears are worth it, right? Because they're
Yeah,
adorably
totally
cuddly.
worth it. Totally worth it, right?
No, but I think that we're going to go through a period of people being like shocked and amazed, and then be able to sort of step back and be like, okay, yeah, actually, this is just another. In the same way that the internet is
Mm.
not alive, even though it operates in some ways kind of like a living organism, right? That has its ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
ChatGPT is not alive, and once we have a generation that is used to the forms of interaction that it's going to generate, and it's not just ChatGPT,
Mm.
it's all sort of large language models and things like that. Once we're used to that, you're going to have power unleashed in every area of society that ideally has the ability. And this is why I was alluding to like what I think technology should be doing for us as a species earlier. All technology should be a thing that allows human beings to live in the world more naturally. I don't want to manage my computer. I don't want to
Mm.
sit around, like I think about Salesforce. I don't want to sit around and try and like fight with Salesforce to get it to do what I want to do. I don't want to sit around
Yeah.
and be like, why is my email like doing this as opposed to doing this? That's a wildly unnatural way of having a system. Why does Microsoft Word like do this? Like that's not at all what any normal human being would do with this. And
Exactly.
that I think is the critical piece that if we can train these systems effectively enough, and the beauty may be coming down to personalization, where if this just becomes an extension of us as individuals, where I have my chat gpt and I'm somebody who I don't necessarily like to do things that other people might enjoy doing. I think about like, oh, I'm not necessarily going to go out every night and be partying like a rock star. I'm a much more introverted person than that. But I have
Yeah.
friends who their energy all comes from other human beings, and so their personal chat gpt slash ai slash sort of large language model that tries to interact with the world for
Mm.
them is out there and understanding like, hey, I saw this event. You might want to check this out. And so if that personalization element comes in and allows us to be like, hey, I know that you're more interested in going to a movie with two people
Yeah.
than going to a party with 200.
Yeah.
I'm going to think is obviously once again a
Yeah.
projected word. I'm going to
Anthropomorphize.
evaluate all the data in the world based on the things that you want, the foods that
Hmm.
you're interested in, the experiences that you're interested in, the people that you're interested in. And that to me is where we could see some really amazing things. And that's to say nothing of all of the applications that we'll see in coding, in art, in all of these different areas. So
Yeah.
that to me is the beauty of the endpoint potential.
I love your
I don't know
beauty
how
that
we
all
get there.
tech, all tech should let people or beings live in the world naturally. I love that.
Yeah,
And
yeah, like this is all going to evolve in ways that you have no conception of, and
yeah,
that's
that
okay.
is so true because right now I think we're in a hype cycle, and
Yeah,
I feel like either a meteorite is either going to hit us or has hit us. Like it's all about Chat GPT,
yeah,
and like the inside of the Earth is like spinning more slowly in the opposite direction. So if you read all those stories together, it doesn't sound so good. Like it sounds really bad, but I think that we're in the middle of something big right now. A lot of
yeah,
change, like you said, a lot of real like functional
yeah,
change going on now, and the future is yet to come out of that for sure.
yeah. No, it'll be super fun, and I think the important thing is to, as opposed to what we always do with technology. So I'm saying like, don't do the thing that we're always going to end up doing because we're human. Um,
But we're human.
yeah, getting caught up in like, oh wow, like it had some ridiculous conversation with a
Yeah.
reporter.
Yeah.
People's like I said, I think it will take many years for organizations like enterprises, governments, all that, and
Yeah.
individuals to get to a point where like I recognize what this is, and it's just a
Yeah.
tool, right?
That's so
That's
that's
all it
such a
is.
great way to look. Chris, it's such a pleasure talking to you. You have so much good energy, and I love how you just approached your life and just dug in and pivoted. And I'm such an honor to have you on the show. And I hope that you'll come back again. And I hope that you have a
Absolutely.
great weekend.
Oh,
Okay.
you too.
So there's a lot to unpack at that episode with Chris Brown. And I'm glad because I think sometimes as consumers, we are just moving at such a rapid pace with technology. We're just having all these things thrown at us. We're using it maybe without thinking. What does it mean when I have technology in my car? What does it mean when you can buy things with crypto? Like, how does that affect people? How does that affect how you drive, how you shop? And I think that because we're moving at such a fast pace, sometimes it's good to just sit back and think, how is this going to affect me? How is this going to affect the world? Next week on Tiny Little Victories, we have our very first New Zealander, a Kiwi, and his name is Darren Keeler. He is the founder, CEO of Way Beyond, which is a farming technology company. Nope, scratch that. It's a technology company that helps growers and farmers maximize crop yield, understand what's happening with their crops around the world. And so interesting about this person, I could have talked to him all day, is that he had no real background in farming. He had a big legacy background in running companies. And he really learned his way by going out and talking to people about their problems. And he did this during COVID-19, where he had to do this over the phone. So it's interesting to see all the relationships he built in such a short time during a pandemic, and has been able to reach so many farmers and so many growers around the world to help them grow better crops. And we are going to have a very lengthy conversation about the tomato. Yes, the cash crop of the fruit slash vegetable world. And we're going to talk about how data and human behavior were able to come together to show people that there was a new market around what? A snackable tomato. Yes, a snackable tomato. It's fascinating. And Darren has a lot of stories to tell about how tomatoes are grown in Sinaloa and the things that go on and the things he's been exposed to that have really shown him the passion that farmers and growers have for growing our food. People we forget about a lot, but without them, we would not have access to food. So join us next week with Darren Keeler, CEO of Way Beyond, on Tiny Little Victories.